Hello, and welcome to another minisode of Movies We Dig, the podcast about films, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Hannah Bazanoff.
And I'm Christy Vogler. And today, we're joined by another former student of mine and our special guest, Emma Coffey. Welcome, Emma.
Hello.
I was trying to just put some applause in there because otherwise it's super awkward. But this is not actually Emma's first time on our show either. We talked to her about the Horrible Histories movie, which you can find on our website or wherever you get your podcasts. For today, though, we'll be taking a quick look at episode 7 of Disney's Percy Jackson and the Olympians, a show adapted from Rick Riordan's 2005 book, The Lightning Thief. This is officially the katabasis episode as well.
Like usual, we'll be conducting a shovel test of this series by giving a brief overview of the episode and providing some information on the ancient sources from which Riordan drew on to tell these stories. Once the season wraps, we'll have Lige and Colin in here to discuss this series in its entirety.
So before we get into the particular episode, Emma, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and then what's your personal history with Percy Jackson?
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Emma, and like Dr. Vogler said, or Christy said, I'm a former student of hers. I actually went to University of Lynchburg, and I'm currently a first-year master's student at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and I'm studying historical archaeology. Percy Jackson holds a very special place in my heart. I grew up with it in elementary school. It really got me into reading when I was younger, and I'm loving the Disney series so far. I have, my own personal issues with it in some cases, but overall, I think it's a pretty decent adaptation. Much better than the movie.
Yeah, I think that's been the general consensus. Is that it's been better than the movie, although we're going to end up revisiting the movie eventually, so we'll see how fondly any of us remember it.
I've actually it's like now that we have a good adaptation, I can appreciate it for the bad adaptation it is, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's just a little silly. Before it was a blight on God's earth.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me the conversation we had with Colin about the muddiness, and I think that's why I'm partly sad that Riordan pushes back so hard against the movie, because it is kind of it's part of what you know if you're immersed in the Percy Jackson world. You know the terrible line from Medusa, you know the Lady Gaga song at the casino, and just having little hints of that in this series would have been nice, or a cameo from the former actors that also popularized it. So it's weird that Riordan wants so much kind of control of the story this time. I say not necessarily weird. I understand why he wants to do that, but I think he's almost a little too bitter about it. And he's not giving his fans a chance to embrace the good and the bad of the entire Riordan-verse.
Well, before we had the show, the movie was universally hated. There were a few things where we'd be okay, they ate there. But until now that we have a good adaptation, there was no love for the movie. It was not considered a good movie. Fans didn't like it. Rick Riordan didn't like it. We found it funny that he didn't like it because we all agreed as one that it was so bad. So I actually kind of get it. Before now it's just, like I said, now it's just kind of goofy. Before it was a bastardization of his life's work.
Yeah.
I'd be bitter too.
I could see some fun spoofs coming up off of the original cast members reacting to the new stuff. Because they have asked the former cast members about the new series, and I think they've been very positive about it, obviously. But I could see some weird spoofs being created by the fanverse at some point about making fun of the old movie and vice versa. So yeah, Hannah, can you give the audience a breakdown of episode 7 and let us know if you dig it?
I dig it. It might be my favorite episode. I leave room for episode 8 to take that place. So yeah, the kids terrorize a small business owner until they can use his back door. They get to Hades. Grover gets temporarily eaten by a dog and fucks up the plan almost immediately. Not his fault. Sorry, Grover, baby boy. They get split up again for some godforsaken reason, and Annabeth has to go ahead and teleport out because of the regret that's alluded to being about Medusa.
Mm-hmm.
They almost get dragged into a pit by an unforeseen evil, and then they have terrible negotiation skills with someone who looks a lot like Ryan Reynolds to me. I thought that was Ryan Reynolds when I saw Hades.
And then they end up on a beach, right? Facing off against Ares. That's the cliffhanger?
Yes. Right at the end.
Okay. Which I'm glad to have Ares back because he was very fun as well.
Oh, well, I guess small note, they do discover that this was a setup the entire time and Kronos was behind everything. Just a small detail though. No big deal.
And his mom is turned into gold, which is
parallels.
Is that
well, no, in the book she's in a fiery little orb.
Okay. Why not do that?
Because Percy was turned into gold.
Ah, that's true. That is true. It all is the Midas touch sort of thing happening. Emma, did you dig this episode, and why or why not?
I did. I really liked the whole Underworld representation just because that is not how I imagined it when I read the books as a kid. It always felt much darker and gloomier, but like the scene where they're running up and down the sand, I'm like, this feels awfully bright for the Underworld. So I really liked that because I thought it was interesting and new, to me at least.
Yeah, the actual katabasis, the travel to the Underworld was really cool, and I liked all of it. I like that you point out that you had a sense it would be darker, but what they really went for as the aesthetic was gray, because it was always described by the ancient Greeks as like the gray place, like very, like somewhere between dark and light, right? And I thought they actually nailed the atmosphere really well in that regard. Okay, eventually I am going to talk about the Medusa setup and everything again, because I am very upset that I feel like we didn't get the payoff promised. And Hannah's right, it could show up in book 8, but I'll explain why I'm upset. But I do want to first talk about like what I really loved. I loved Procruste's waterbed shop. I thought that was excellent. Like I said, it was kind of a nostalgia memory for me to see all those waterbeds. It was really weird because I'm like, okay. But as a son of Poseidon, that makes perfect sense for Procruste's. And then, gosh, just about everything about the Underworld, I really enjoyed. I liked Charon, too, where you don't really see his face. And he has the dog whistle and I'm pretty sure it was like knuckle bones or something that he was using.
Like all the design and attention to detail were so good.
Well, and because we have found bones like that at Gange Vecchio. They were pig bones that have holes in them that we're pretty sure were like intentionally drilled in or something. And we have no idea what they're about. There have been other instances at sites where whistles have been made or other types of early instruments are carved out of bone. So I thought that was a really cool touch. And then, yeah, I found Hades wholly delightful. So I have one little clip of him really quick that I'll play for us to listen to.
You really don't want the bolt.
Why would I want that?
Start a war between your brothers.
Why would I want that?
Jealousy.
I don't know if you noticed, but it's all candy canes and rainbows down here. I'm managing just fine. I don't really do jealous. My brothers, on the other hand, have the market cornered on jealous. Family drama is why I don't go up there anymore. These grudges, they go on forever. Super unhealthy.
I like this take on Hades because I feel it's a swing back from what Disney's Hercules did to Hades, which was to really...
It's a swing back from what Rick did to Hades.
I was curious. Yeah, can you guys tell me a bit about the description of Hades in this meeting? Because I feel like they changed a lot here, didn't they?
That's a whole new man at this point.
All right, well, give me the info.
Hades in the book is very much like a tired middle-aged man. Like a single mom who works 2 jobs, who loves her kids and never stops. I would argue that he's one of the better parents out of the Olympians. Yeah, he actually loves his kids, who will see. Ooh, spoiler. But it's very much like, first of all, he is every uncle that didn't get invited to like the after party for their nephew's graduation and is just holding on to that bitter resentment about it. He's like, yeah, I'm down here because they put me down here. They kicked me out. Anyways, his whole reasoning is he's like, I don't want war. We're understaffed. I'd have to hire more people. We don't have the money.
Yeah, I thought it made a lot of logical sense in that regard. It was like, why would I want that?
The things you liked, I mean, I liked them, but they were actually like more big changes from the books. First of all, when we see Krusty, they find for Krusty's and his shop by like, they're going around the streets of LA and they start to get harassed by some hooligans on the street. So they run into Krusty's just to like get away from them because that's when they find out that celestial bronze does not work on mortals.
Oh, okay.
Because they're like, I have a gun. They're like, I have a sword. And they're like, no, you don't.
So they can't see it. Okay.
Wait, they might be able to see it. I can't remember. Sorry. I can't remember off the top of my head. They might be able to see it. But either way, it doesn't touch them.
Okay.
Yeah, so they run in there. Annabeth and Grover just kind of like collapse on the beds because Krusty is, being a creep. And it's Percy who actually figures out that something is up. They don't go in there knowing this. And then Percy decapitates him. Slay.
Okay. That is good to know because that's going to go into my diatribe later. So
no, I know exactly what you were thinking about. I made notes when I was watching it. I was like, really? They let this guy live?
Exactly.
Out of all of them?
Exactly. They leave him trapped in order to just let anyone continue to be chopped up by the man. He is like one of our first literary serial killers ever. And they're like, yeah, this guy will let go. We got things to do.
Annabeth says, like, you're lucky we're letting you keep your head. Yeah, literally, because in the books, he cuts off his head, as they should. Although that brings up the question of, like, if Procrustes is a demigod, did he become immortal? And if he became immortal, how did he achieve godhood? And did he become a monster? Like, why, like, would that just be, like, killing another demigod or killing a monster? Actually, maybe that's why they didn't do that, now that I think about it.
I mean, that would have been a little too close to actual murder, right? Because, like, that isn't that the problem with all the demigod kids is they can all die, and they usually all die relatively young.
Yeah, so interesting. Now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why they didn't kill him, because that's a little too close to murder.
You don't say. But it's okay, because it happened to Medusa. And, like, that, I guess that's a question about Medusa then, too, because she was human, right? Like, she was fully human, transformed by Athena. So, like, is Athena what turned her into a monster then?
I would assume so.
And that, begs the question then, it's like, how are gods capable of creating monsters?
Be a bad parent.
Yeah, it's just, well, it was like more of the mechanics is like, it's not like you can, well, I guess Medusa was made that way. She was transformed by Athena that way. But for the most part, like, it's the gods or relatives of the gods, like the Titans, that give birth to monsters. That's why I liked the Echidna episode, because she's like, dude, we're all family. The distinction you make between us and monsters is not that large. So I do want to ask, Emma, what have you been thinking about the Medusa storyline so far? Because to me, that's been the most controversial aspect.
Yeah, I really don't know how I feel about it, because I feel like the typical response to Medusa is very interesting, just because I feel like a lot of people go off of Ovid's Metamorphoses, like, interpretation of it, of her being assaulted and then turned into a Gorgon because of it. I think it's interesting how Rick is doing it, how good old Uncle Rick is doing it in this case, but...
So, supposedly, in episode 7, we're supposed to get this whole explanation of, like, or this, like, tie-up with Medusa's storyline. There is no reference to her whatsoever, and I will argue for a point where it could have been brought up as an actual talking point. So, that being said, I went back to the Variety article to be like, what was our sense of this? What was going on? And the reason I was really hung up was, like, not only was Procrustes let go, a literal serial killer. They just let go. Which differs from the book, because they probably figured out putting on screen the actual beheading of someone that, while bad, if still viewed as human and a man, you can't do that, apparently. So there's that.
Yeah, it's very different from my kill all men stance in life.
Right.
That was also Death from Supernatural. So shout out to him. I love him.
Oh, okay. Well, and then talking about parallels, we also have our first face-off with a monster that's more animal-like, right? We had that with the Minotaur. Minotaur was slain without much afterthought. We figure out that Cerberus is just a big sweetheart, and all you have to do is give him head scritches and throw his ball, and you have defeated him.
Well, Cerberus he also has a job, he sits there, and also that's not how we do it in the books. In the books, they get down there, and Annabeth has, like, a red rubber ball she took from Waterworld, and she, like, chucks it. And so when he goes to get it, that's when they sneak their way in.
A perfectly humane way of dealing with a monster that literally tried to eat Grover.
Okay, but they were coming into his home.
Like, Grover was in his mouth.
They were the intruders. In the mortal world, the Minotaur was...
Were they not at Medusa's?
Okay, that's a good one. But don't bring Medusa into this. You started talking about the Minotaur.
Oh, well, no, I was just comparing, like, we saw an animal-like creature again, which we would sometimes feign less sense of guilt over for killing. And if you slayed him, he'd just get back up, right? He's already in the underworld. Where do they pop up from?
They actually reform in Tartarus.
In Tartarus, okay.
And then they make their way out. Like, in book 5, we see Medusa again.
Okay.
In the Battle of Manhattan.
So, arguably, would have been a great way to just get rid of Cerberus for a while. Just stab him in the heart, I say.
No, we don't do that to Cerberus.
That's what I'm saying. It's like, how can they... I'm glad they found the humane way to deal with it. Why can't we do that with all the monsters that we are showing to middle school students? Of like, hey...
Because the monsters are chasing them in the real world. They come to their homes, to their schools. That's why Percy can't stay at one school. Because, like, they even say it at the end of the episode. Sally's like, a horse followed him to school. That's his school. They can fight.
And the horse was nice. And he drew a picture of it.
That is Blackjack. He has a name. We see him later again. He has, like, a thick New York accent.
Okay. So my thing is I liked Cerberus because it was really showing that like we can humanely come up with solutions to these monsters that are being obstacles to us. And then I'm just like, why couldn't we have done... And I'm not necessarily saying Medusa shouldn't have been slain. I almost kind of wished they would have pulled the older trick of like using a mirror reflection to have her turn into stone instead of beheading her, because at least that could have been accidental or just like quickly you're trying to shield your eyes. And then there could have been like some remorse on part of the kids being like, that wasn't necessarily what we intended, but we're just trying to keep ourselves safe. Yeah, you can say the same thing about beheading someone, but...
Well, I mean, he was kind of just slashing at air, so it's kind of pure chance that he got her head, now that I think about it.
She was invisible, yes. But when you're slashing something with a sword, you are expecting maiming at the very least.
She was trying to kill them.
She did also give them a chance in that episode. Like, she gave them a choice. Go with the Fury or go with me.
There's that. And also just side with me against your parents, which Annabeth should have probably chosen instead of calling her an outright liar.
That's Annabeth's regret. That's why she gets trapped in the fields of Asphodel.
Is that her regret, or is her regret somehow tied to her family?
I think it's both, because I think the Medusa thing is like inextricably tied to her family. That's her mother. Like, what is such a tangible regret to me is not like, I shouldn't have been idolizing my mother. A tangible regret is more like, I told a victim they were a liar to their face, and now I know that I was wrong.
I hope that is in fact the direction they're going to take it, because that's the only way I've seen like progress with the Medusa storyline is through Annabeth's growth. So I hope your interpretation is correct, because my sense was what I knew from the books is like she's grappling with the thought of like being away from her family, right? She ran away from home. She doesn't want to go back and give them a chance. She's lived at Camp Half-Blood. Like she lives there 24/7, right? I thought the regret might be coming from was the fact that like she ran away from her family.
Oh, I didn't think about that at all.
So I like your, if like that's the direction they're going, great. If it's the other way, then they will have effed it up pretty badly.
I definitely think that's what's happening, because they said they would revisit it, and I don't find it like, I also would not confess. I think I called an abuse survivor a liar while like we were on a time sensitive mission and I was being held down by some foliage. You know, I think I would save that for a heart to heart at a later time.
Yeah. No, like I said, I really hope that is what they do, because I think that's a better interpretation of it for sure.
Chekhov and his gun will be rolling in his grave if they don't.
Yeah. So tied in with all of this, because like the tie-in was supposed to be with Sally, right? Like we were going to get this flashback with Sally and Poseidon that we were supposed to understand something more about Medusa with that. So I went back and pulled up that quote. There's a third act to that subplot of Medusa and Poseidon and Sally that you haven't seen it yet. It comes in episode 7, a really powerful flashback scene where you see Sally and Poseidon together, Rick says. What's most interesting to me about episode 3 is where it positions Medusa with respect to Sally and an awareness that they both dated the same guy and had very different experiences. Steinberg says, I like that the story perceives that the relationship from Percy's point of view is not entirely clear. Did they love each other? It seems like they did, but what went wrong? Did anything go wrong? Is it possible that Medusa had an awful experience with Poseidon and Sally didn't? And my whole thing with that is like, that shouldn't matter if what Poseidon did to Medusa was truly terrible, whether it was abuse or whether it was just abandonment of her after she was abused by Athena instead. Because there's nothing within Medusa's background story. She made it seem like Poseidon cared about her, and then Medusa was left all by herself, right?
I did pick something up. Okay, so in the scene, she summons him somehow by like lighting a match and then like dropping it in the water, and rain starts coming down.
Pause. I can explain that really quick. It's sacrifices is smoke. Ooh. The smell.
Ooh.
They want the good smell, so she sent him a sundae.
Okay, that makes sense. I just wasn't understanding the match part. I was like, there's no fire here. Okay, do you think any kind of smoke could count as a sacrifice?
That was the idea, is that general sacrifices to the gods you burned because the smoke rose and supposedly sent the good smells to them. So that was the idea.
Okay, first episode, when Percy gets home, what is happening? Sally is sitting outside in the rain, smoking a cigarette.
That's a good point.
I think she was talking to Poseidon. And that's why we have that whole like Olivia Rodrigo heartbreak song going on.
Yep.
Like 2 + 2 = 5. I'm the love of your life. But the rain and the sun.
Yep. Okay, so I agree with you. These men, these creators of this Medusa plotline, have just been like, well, Percy's being shooketh by the fact that, like, oh, my dad might have treated someone poorly. And then somehow that was also going to translate into, like, maybe something's wrong with my mom because she's with that guy. And I'm like, you also had her with Gabe, so I don't know what else you could say about. She's not good at relationships, at the very least, with adult men.
Well, the Gabe situation.
Currently.
For the people who can't see,
I know you're both making faces.
Mine and Emma's. Yeah, me and Emma and I look horrified. We're like,
Yeah.
listen, Sally's got her problems, but she's a
well, but like that's just it. Is it a great relationship with their son? Because we have this whole flashback scene that Hermes had alluded to in the previous episode, right? Like, arguably, this is Sally at one of her lowest moments as a parent. And so I have a clip from that. Let me play that real quick.
Have you considered homeschool?
Homeschool.
I know. It sounds overwhelming, but there are resources to help. It's a real option. Some children are better off being with their parent.
I'm sorry, but no, I cannot accept that as an answer. So let's, you and I, figure out a way to make this work.
And I liked in that moment when you see the actual clip, like you see Percy, young Percy, actually light up for a moment at the thought he could just stay with his mom and be homeschooled by her. And I kind of have this question too of like, why is she so concerned for his safety that she's moving him from school to school and doesn't consider like homeschooling a real option? Like, why does she feel she has to be separate? Like she talks about later not being able to stay in the city with him. Why does she need to stay in the city? Is it tied to work specifically? I'm not saying it's easy for her to relocate somewhere for the safety of her son, but like, I don't understand this compared to other instances we've seen between her and Percy.
Okay, I'm going to come at this from two angles. And we can handle the angle of like in story that like demigods aren't supposed to stay in one place for too long because that attracts monsters and stuff. But I also feel like, I don't know, have you ever tried homeschooling a problem kid with ADHD, Christy?
No.
It's incredibly hard.
Yeah. But so it's hard at schools too, isn't it? Depending. That's why she's sending him to this school.
Yeah, but it can be relationship breaking. And also a school is a whole staff of people who can take care of someone. They have stuff on hand. Homeschooling is hard. You have to buy all the materials yourself. And it's very hard with like kids with learning disabilities. You like, that's kind of, homeschooling is expensive too. Like school is expensive, but homeschooling is also expensive. And homeschooling can like ruin your relationship with people because like, if you're the authoritarian all the time, it's going to ruin your relationship with someone.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And homeschooling is... I would not have wished someone homeschooling me on my worst enemy. And my worst enemies are my parents.
You know, I've always actually felt that before. And then recently I saw interviews with more often children of color who are in school systems that just are more problematic than being at home. And that's only, our homeschool system would have to be totally overhauled and to actually doing checks on children to make sure they're okay and stuff. Because yeah, a lot of abuse is hidden through the homeschool system. But for some children, that could be a benefit. And you're right, I don't know about learning disabilities, how much more difficult that could be to manage and put a strain on the parent-child relationship. So
Sally is also a working woman who has no other family. She doesn't really have the money to just stop her job and raise Percy.
That's why I was curious, because like I don't know enough about her, of like, what does she do that...
Well, it says in the first episode that she's the only one in the house that works.
Yeah.
I mean, if you see like a woman with her son, you're gonna assume that like she has to be working in order to keep them alive. I don't know. I feel like that was a little bit of a privileged take about like, why not just homeschool him?
Well, that my question was, he was interested in that. Like you could see that in the clip. Like he wanted that option more than being sent away. But I bring that up more because I think what Sally's failure isn't because she decided to homeschool him. It's because she hasn't explained to him And even if she's hiding all of the god stuff, she hasn't explained this enough to him to not feel traumatized by this decision, right? Sally's failed on some level to empathize with where he's coming from, which she has successfully been shown to do later, right? Like in episode 1, she was much more emotionally intelligent. In this one, she's just much more of like, unlock the car, don't make these last moments nasty. Like it was a lot more, like I said, more realistic parenting moments, it felt like, but also it was Sally at her worst because she hasn't, I mean, Percy just looks distraught this whole time. She has in no way convinced him that like this is going to make him feel safe. This is going to make him feel comforted. And so that's why I brought up the homeschool thing, because if you look at the clip again, he does seem like that option was really appealing to him, and she hasn't gone to explain why that wouldn't actually be good for both of them. I think that was actually more where I was coming at, of like, why hasn't every option been explored with Percy and explained to him of like, why is this the best option?
How do you explain to a 7-year-old that you live in poverty?
I don't know.
Womp womp.
But you don't have to explain that necessarily either, right? Like, it's more of just failing to but like he's scared enough, like he's locking the door, he's not talking, like this is not a good reaction from a child whatsoever.
Yeah, but it's also not the first time it's happened. Like, we know Percy goes to multiple schools, that he's been kicked out of like 7 schools in 7 years. So it's probably like, I assume she was
like, do we watching the show know that? Is that that was brought up in episode 1, right? As part of the disciplinary hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So like, I imagine she was a lot more patient the first few times around, but at some point it's like, there is no other way to make this work, and we've talked about that, and you need to get out of the car. I don't want to make this ugly. It's very hard. I was hard on Sally about like the pool episode. This episode actually made me really come around to her, because it just reminded me a lot of my childhood, honestly. It's like, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been the kid who locks the door and refuses to get out of the car. And at some point you do grow up and you understand it.
Yeah.
This actually made me feel a lot more charitable towards Sally. For a second, I was actually worried that they were going to like take it in a weird revenge storyline, that I'll leave you in hell because you didn't let me be homeschooled. I was actually worried about that for a second.
Yeah. I think that's interesting too. Why put in this subplot?
Well, it's a parallel. He's understanding that sometimes you have to do things you don't want to, and sometimes you have to leave people behind even when you don't want to. But you'll see them again later and you can fix it.
Yeah. Emma, what have you thought about the whole Sally Percy relationship in this?
I think in the show it's very interesting. I do like the flashbacks, because I'm also going to talk a lot about the book just because that's what I grew up on. So, yeah, just to preface that.
That's all we do, babe.
Okay,
it's okay.
Good. I mean, yeah, just wanted to make sure. But I feel like I do like the background, like flashbacks and everything between Sally and Percy, because I feel like in the first episode when they talk about trying to make sure that Percy is like prepared for all of this, and I think it might have been a conversation between Percy and Annabeth. I can't remember exactly, but he's having a conversation with someone, and he's like, someone criticized, I think, his mom not preparing him enough, but I feel like by seeing the flashbacks and things like that, where it's kind of like getting the idea that, oh yeah, Sally did do what she was supposed to do in some shape or form. Like, whether it be like the Kansas quote, I liked that one. I thought that was kind of funny. Like we're not in Kansas anymore. That was funny.
We left Kansas 4 days ago. Autistic queen.
And the fact, I also love the fact that, like, part of that preparing him is like, yeah, I read the Odyssey, the graphic novel. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly, if my kid's not into reading, but loves comics and stuff, that's how I would introduce the Odyssey to him. The one other point about this flashback scene I wanted to bring up, what I think would have worked really well, because I'll play the clip, is if part of the misgivings Sally had about introducing Percy to the world is the fact, like, calling out Poseidon, because like Poseidon's expected to be called out in this moment, right? We're supposed to see like how cruel this relationship that gods have with mortals can be, because like Sally's having to make this really hard decision and leave her son behind at her school. And she could have in that moment called out, it's like, I know what you did to Medusa. Like, even if like they actually cared about each other, there wasn't any abuse. The fact that like Poseidon abandoned her after Athena had cursed her, right? Like, why would I put my faith in you to take care of us when like I've seen what you've done to other women you've been with? So like, why not call it out in that moment? And instead, this was her reasoning, which I still think works. But like, if you were going to really tie in the Medusa element and just having a little bit of critique of Poseidon's role in the whole debacle, it would have been the moment to do it. So here it is.
I want him to know who he is before your family tries to tell him who they want him to be. He is better than that. He has better things in him than that.
Then I think you have your answer. He's going to go to school. And he's going to learn things that you can't teach him there. And it's going to be hard for the both of you. It's going to be torture for the both of you. But he will be stronger for it on the other side. His mother raised him well.
And I'm just like, that could have been the moment, right? That she's not even calling up Poseidon. She's like, your family. I don't want your family to define what, you know, who Percy is going to be. And right after this, she invites, she says, hey, do you want to go, you have a chance to meet him? Why not call out and be like, I don't fully trust you to be a good role model for my son. I see what your family does, and I don't want them to define who he is. And instead, we just get a very supportive Poseidon in a very sexy Aussie accent.
Yeah, that was strangely supportive.
Right? They always put an accent on someone they want you to trust or distrust, depending on the accent. But like,
You said it, Christy,
the
not
sexy
me.
Aussie accent, you're supposed to trust that one.
Hugh Jackman has tricked us all.
Exactly. Right? I think this would have been the moment. Sally knows her story. Sally told the story of Medusa to Percy. So why not call it out in this moment? If you were saying that you were going to make that subplot like connected to Medusa. And instead we're just like, oh yeah, he did something terrible to Medusa, but look how great he is with Sally. And don't worry, he'll be there for Percy when Percy really needs him. And that's my diatribe.
He'll finally come back with milk.
Yeah.
That's a long trip to the grocery store.
So agree, disagree? Am I the only one that feels like
No,
that would have been the moment?
It's very strangely pro Poseidon. For a moment that it's supposed to like highlight it. Like, that's actually, I forgot that we were supposed to see a scene where like about between Poseidon and Sally. So that actually like surprised me. The only thing I really interpreted as like about Medusa or the gods' wrongdoings was Annabeth getting ensnared in the fields of Asphodel, which is different from the books because in the fields they're literally just standing around doing nothing.
Okay, so fun fact, I have a tattoo of asphodels on my leg because they grow natively in Greece, and I liked it because they're associated with the Underworld and Persephone, but also what's interesting about the Asphodel Fields is like that's where you go when you never did anything especially good or especially bad. And it's actually not really viewed favorably. So I also kind of use it as a reminder that like neutrality isn't always the best answer to things. Sometimes it's better to make a decision for good or bad. So
That's a Christy quote. I'll slap that on a t-shirt. That's good.
Okay, can I ask a question? Can I do devil's advocate?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say doing nothing is still a choice, though? Like, even if it's just a very passive one?
It's the neutral choice, right? Like, so neutrality is a very real choice you can make, but it's neither going to sink you in the pits of Tartarus, which is where you go like Sisyphus, nor does it get you into the Elysian fields. It's its own place. So you kind of have to decide for yourself, you know, what do you want in the end? What do you want your decisions to lead to? So neutrality is a very real choice.
Sometimes I just feel like doing nothing is still a bad thing. Because it's like, if you can do something about something, but you choose to do nothing, it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Well, clearly nothing, but...
Yeah. So I thought that Grover's explanation was almost a good explanation, because he's like, oh, it's regrets. It's like, well, it's not necessarily regrets. It's like regrets for decisions you made or for decisions you haven't made. And I'm like, okay, that's a little bit more accurate in terms of like the choices you make, decisions you make, good or bad. And that like not making a decision can also lead you to be trapped in the fields of Asphodel. And so I really like, Hannah, I am so hoping that your interpretation of Annabeth getting stuck there is correct. And I'm so fearful if they go the other direction, because it would help that subplot with Medusa a lot if that's what her regret was overall.
That's what I think it is.
Well, I'll give us a little bit more background on the Domos Haidu, or Hades, the House of Hades. It's the land of the dead, the final resting place for departed souls. It's a dark and dismal realm where bodiless ghosts flitted across the gray fields of Asphodel. And that was the earliest interpretation of the underworld. There wasn't really these separations into like the really bad place and the like, oh, it's actually kind of nice to be here. The dead were often described roaming across the fields of Asphodel, which is a pale gray plant. It is edible but very bland, and the ancients regarded it as a food of last resort. And then the Homeric poems, like hymns to Demeter, and of course the Iliad and the Odyssey, they didn't ever mention the Elysian fields or the Tartarian hell. Rather, all shades, heroes and villains alike, came to rest in the gloom of Hades. And then people want more from their afterlife, so they fleshed it out a little bit more over the years. And eventually there's certain mystery cults that fully develop the concept of reincarnation, because they're like, yeah, no one wants to stay down there for like ever. And then, I don't know, the one other question I kind of had was this change of character for Hades. I'm kind of interested in this history, this idea of the Disney's Hercules, Hades, being like, oh, I am going to overthrow my brothers because I hate it down here. But I feel like more modern romances with Hades and Persephone very much painted as like, nah, this is a pretty sweet gig. We don't have to deal with all the shenanigans of the Olympians up top. So I don't know. What do you guys think they went with this interpretation of them this time?
Part of me wonders, like for me at least, part of me wonders if they were trying to kind of stray away from like the Hercules perception of Hades, just because it feels like in that one, like yes, he's a villain, but he also just feels like more like comedic relief, and it feels hard to take him seriously, at least in that movie. But I feel like in this one, he's a little bit more self-aware and like not wanting to do the whole shenanigan thing.
Yeah.
So I feel like in a way they're respecting Hades a little bit more for like who he is and his job.
Yeah. I liked him. He's very nonchalant for a character that is very chalant all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He is deeply upset and angry about everything all the time.
Yeah.
So in like the Lotus Hotel, something like you have to really strain to hear is at some point you can hear a little kid going, Bianca, Bianca, in the background. And that's because Hades' children, Nico and Bianca, are in the Lotus Hotel and Casino at the moment. And they've been there for like 70 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so he takes them out because he's like, oh, so we're getting a war. It's time for the prophecy. What about my children who I've had hidden away this entire time?
Oh, okay. So this was my other question about this scene in Hades. Mm-hmm. I know that, Hannah, you've talked about the concept of the fatal flaw. It feels like they fully removed that from this series, especially in this moment, because this was supposed to be like a big moment of that, right?
Well, so the fatal flaw, once again, is supporting evidence as to why the Titan's Curse is the best of the books. We don't actually hear the term fatal flaw like being applied to them in any way until the third book. I am jumping the gun. So, but we have seen them demonstrate it. One thing that at least I interpreted as them demonstrating their fatal flaws, Percy's is extreme personal loyalty. He will let the world burn for the people he loves, and he will destroy himself for the people he loves. And Annabeth's is pride. So we have Percy sitting his ass down in that golden chair, knowing damn well he's not getting back up. And then Annabeth like scuttling around to like, she's convinced that like maybe I can make this god's trap work backwards. I can do it.
Nice.
So I thought that was like a nice little demonstration of their fatal flaws, even if we haven't actually like clocked them on it yet.
I think you're right. That might have been why they changed the trap that they did for episode 5. Episode 5, they changed the trap to reflect the flaws because it kind of got removed in this moment instead. Then, right? Like Percy actively makes the decision to not sacrifice himself. Or is like, nah, I'll take the other deal. See you later, and off we go. And then, so my understanding for the whole Tartarus pit thing, I thought it was the shoes dragging him. It was the winged shoes dragging him in.
In the books, Luke asks Percy over like Iris message. He's like, "Oh, are you liking the shoes?" And Percy doesn't want to tell him, "No, I'm not wearing the gift you gave me." So he's like, "Oh yeah, they're great." So yeah, it's a booby trap. Shout out to like the people on TikTok who have never read or seen Percy Jackson and don't know Luke is the traitor. Because I love coming across their little slideshows, like ranking my favorite characters, who I think is the traitor. And it's just like Clarice. She's definitely got something against him. She does, but it's not this.
I was gonna say, and it's like that. Isn't that too obvious? Like, and she can't really. How much of a traitor can she be if like Percy's not even friends with her?
A lot of people think it's Grover,
But Grover's an angel.
I know.
Hey, but as we saw in his conversation with Ares, he's got a conniving little mind in this series.
Yeah,
He knows.
Oh, yeah.
He knows his way around a conversation if he needs to. I bet you that's the one that like made people question who don't know that it's Luke. They're like, dude, I saw what you did with Ares there. I saw that reverse psychology you were pulling.
I will say, Luke gave himself away in the episode because they tell him, "We know who the lightning thief is," and he doesn't say, "Oh, who is it?" He says, "How do you know?" He's given up the game right there.
So I guess what I was going to ask you guys, what are your predictions for the final episode? You have some book information, but they've definitely not stuck to it specifically. So what do you predict for the final episode?
I'm really hoping that, let's just say Medusa's head makes an appearance. And there wants to be a poker player garden statue that gets sold somewhere. I wouldn't object to that.
This is my lost face. Very lost.
Read the
books.
They included this in
That's
the
all I gotta
movie. So basically what they do with Medusa's head is they're like, "Oh, what happened to Medusa's head? It went to a better place." The better place is that Sally no longer has to work because she becomes rich and able to focus on writing a novel because she sells this intricate stone statue of a poker player, and she makes so much money off of it. Unfortunately, it's the only work the artist has ever released. She straight up kills the abuser. That's one of the reasons I love Percy Jackson so much. She just kills him. Rick Riordan just killed the abuser and sold his body for money.
All right. Okay. Good to know. So wait, Sally ends up with Medusa's head, or just like ends up
just briefly?
Okay. That could be
It has like
interesting.
a quick
then.
use.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would allow that.
I mean,
Wait. Oh, hold on. That would come around as like a protecting. She said like Medusa was saying that her and Sally are sisters in a way, and that could come around as like a moment of protection.
That could be a great plot twist,
Yeah.
like to end the storyline, maybe, or at least acknowledge more of the Medusa storyline.
I can see Annabeth coming up with that, or like Annabeth and Percy like collaborating on that.
Ah,
Like I feel like, like to right her wrongs or at least attempt to.
that would be beautiful.
I would like that. That would make me happier. For sure.
Full circle.
sitting here,
Call
like,
us.
I'm just like sitting here. # justice for Medusa. I really need more justice for her. Yeah. Hannah, any other predictions on your part?
In the book, Luke like surprises Percy with a scorpion, and like puts it on him, and then he makes his escape. I feel like they'll probably change that up somehow, to make it more thematic.
But I also think that this series has been really trying to set up Luke as a more sympathetic character. So like,
For sure.
it's kind of like Zuko, right? You're rooting for the bad boy to learn better ways. All right. I just wanted to do one final call out from the Variety article that I was frustrated with. It mentions, in regards to the original film, as a 12-year-old boy in 2005, I don't think he had the bandwidth for deconstructing the patriarchy, adds Rick. He was looking at it as, this is a scary woman who's trying to turn me into stone. And you know what? I'm not asking the 12-year-old boy to dismantle the patriarchy. I'm asking the grown men to reflect upon it and incorporate that into their writing. That is all I will say on that front.
Ooh, burn.
And with that, special thanks to Emma for joining us today. We'll be back next week to react and analyze episode 8, the final episode for season 1 of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. We will also be doing a recording with the whole crew to talk about the series in its entirety. And finally, as I mentioned, there are plans to revisit the first Percy Jackson film.
As for you listeners, you can find us on most major streaming platforms as well as movieswedig.com. Please like, review, and subscribe if you like what you hear. You can also follow on Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky under some variation of the handle @movieswedig. Let us know what you thought about the trio's katabasis. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.